Okay, now welcome to the instructor insights section. You now have the knowledge of things like STP, entry modes, and B2B digital. But in the interview room, you must be able to speak the language of the executive. So basically, what this lecture will do, it will show you how to integrate these learnings that you have had in earlier lectures into your answers in the interview room for the maximum impact. That's the idea. So, why these metrics matter? I mean, what actually is happening talking about these metrics during interviews when discussing marketing? Always focus on value metrics, so called value metrics, not vanity metrics. So, what are these value metrics? Some example I want to give you. Things like CLV, that is the customer lifetime value, or it may be CAC, which is what is the cost of acquisition of the customers, and ROMI, that is the return on marketing investment, or market share. So, what are these different metrics? These are very common metrics actually. There can be much more, many more metrics are possible. So, if we talk of CLV, that is the customer lifetime value, the total revenue a single customer is expected to generate over their relationship with the company. That is the CLV, that is the customer lifetime value. For high value B2B trade, this metric CLV can be actually very large, obviously. Now, if we talk of another very common value metric, that is the CAC that I just mentioned about, that is the cost of customer acquisition. So basically, it is very clear, very easy to understand that how much money you spend to get a customer. That is your CAC, cost of customer acquisition. Then I talked about so-called ROMI, that is the return on marketing investment. So this is nothing but the profitability generated by your marketing spend. So this is the ultimate metric actually. This is the main aim of any company for justifying the cost, budgets, the spends. So this ROMI has to be the ultimate objective of any marketing effort. Then market share, which is nothing but your company's sales as a percentage of the total sales in your target market, overseas market. So I want to give you one tip that you should be able to talk about these value metrics when you give your answers. So, one example I can give you, if you have to say that in particular situation when you are answering to a particular question in an interview room, that you have to spend more on ads. So instead of saying that we will spend more on ads, how do you use these value metrics terms at least to show that you know about these things? That you can say that we project a CLV which is six times higher than the CAC. That is, the customer lifetime value is six times higher than the cost of acquisition of the customer, and which justifies a high initial marketing investment, that is ROMI, to secure early market share. So, by this statement, you are able to, for example, use these very common value metrics that you know about it. You are giving it as an example. Instead of defining, you don't need to define what are these value metrics. So, this will basically show you your literacy of not only marketing concepts but also your financial literacy, which is very important actually. Now, another very important thing uh, to talk about is about the frameworks, and especially when you are answering for some strategic questions in marketing or sales. So, when you are asked about some kind of broad strategic questions like should we enter into this international market, or what challenges can be faced in a new market, international market, then you don't ramble. Use structured frameworks, common frameworks, PESTEL, SWOT. You should be having a practical knowledge of these frameworks, and that should be demonstrable in your answers. So, for example, if we talk of PESTEL, which is political, economic, socio-cultural, technological, environmental, legal analysis, it's a very structured framework actually. So, you can use this framework, PESTEL framework, uh, for external analysis to identify major threats and opportunities in a new international market. So this should be visible in your answers. So if, for example, if you give this kind of answer that the legal environment regarding intellectual property, for example, in a particular country, target country, is weak, which is a major threat to our strategy. So when you are explaining this situation in interview, you can use this kind of terminologies, talking about frameworks like PESTEL. So it will show you to the executive or the executives who are taking your interview in the interview room that you know about PESTEL analysis, a particular framework which is very common framework. Similarly, you can talk about another very important framework, that is SWOT analysis: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you generally use this kind of framework for internal and external analysis of the company situation, for taking decisions, international marketing decisions or market entry decisions. So basically, this framework links companies' internal strengths or capabilities, or it can be weakness also, to the markets, overseas markets, external forces, opportunities, threats. So you should be able to understand this. You should have knowledge about this kind of framework, and you should be able to give some kind of references to the different parts of this framework. For example, when you are answering some question, you can, for example, you can speak like this, that our core strength is superior technology of a particular company which you are talking about, but the opportunity, market opportunity, is limited by our weaknesses in the distribution network. So here you're talking about weakness, you're talking about the strength, you're talking about the technology. So it shows that you know about this framework. Using these frameworks basically demonstrates that your analysis is thorough and repeatable. Basically, you're giving situations, you're giving examples of the situation, and the interviewer will feel that you can repeat these things when you are working for the company. This is how it happens. So, finally, these are the questions that will be asked, but generally, these will be complemented by some kind of behavioral questions also, such as, for example, tell us something about a time you handled a particular crisis in this area, actually, or tell me about a successful international market entry you carried out. So, how do you answer this question? Again, take the example or the methodology that we talked about earlier in this course in different sections. That is the STAR method. If you remember, use the same method, but when you use STAR method, again, try to use those metrics that I talked about in this lecture and the frameworks. Try to bring them in the answers. For example, in the STAR method, when you talk about situation, so in this situation, what you are doing, you are basically describing the context. For example, what is the context? We launched a product into a particular market some year back, maybe 3 year back, 2 year back, or 5 year back, whatever, maybe something which you remember, some incidents you remember, you refer to that, and you can say that we launched a product in a particular market. You can mention the market, which market, maybe German market, EU market, maybe US market, maybe UAE market, whatever, whichever market. You launch something and you talk about T of the star. That is the task. What was actually your goal in that particular situation, in that context which you are talking about, which you are referring to? So, for example, you can say that my task was to achieve at least 10% market share in the first year or maybe first few years, whatever the situation may be. And A of the star, that is the action, which talks about what specific steps did you take actually? What was the action actually that you took? So here you have to focus on your individual contribution of the situation, that you did some analysis of pestle analysis, some kind of SWOT analysis. You focused on the initial investment, that is ROMI, and you also had some kind of focus on customer acquisition cost, that is CAC, cost of the customer acquisition. So you have to focus on what is your contribution. By using certain framework, you contributed to the task, and you have to talk about the R of the star, that is the results. What were the measurable outcomes of the task that you did in a given situation? With what kind of action? Action means you utilize certain metrics, you utilize some frameworks. Here in the results, you can again link back to those metrics that you used in the action. So, for example, you can say that we hit not 10%, but even 12% market share, increasing our CLV, that is the customer lifetime value, by more than 20%. So, this is the way you have to create a kind of story, because this is a behavioral question. It's talking about you, your action, your contribution, your results that came. So, how do you explain this thing in a story form using STAR method? So, structuring your stories this way ensures you are basically concise, focused on results, and you're answering the interviewer's exact questions actually. That is the aim. Okay. So, in the next lecture, we will look at specific interview expectations for roles like international marketing executive or international business development manager. What are their roles? What are their interview expectations? Those things we'll discuss in the next lecture.